this video, I'm going to show you how to learn any language quickly and effectively. How to be able to understand it and speak it without wasting time, without using stupid apps, without studying grammar, without going to language classes, and without thousands of hours of so-called comprehensible input, without time waste. As long as you follow this method and follow every step consistently, you will achieve fluency fast. 3 or 4 months maximum. 6 months if you take it easy, 1 month if you go full-time and work really hard like a savage. Let's get started. Learning a language is really simple. There's a bunch of things you need to know. And the first thing are words. You need to know a lot of words to be able to understand and speak a language. Because if you don't know the meaning of the words, you won't understand the language, and obviously you won't be able to speak it either. Then you also need to understand those words. You need to know what those words sound like when they're spoken by native speakers. You need to know the right pronunciation, not just to understand those words, but also so that people understand you. And third, you need speaking practice. You need a lot of speaking practice. You can't get fluent and you can't speak well if you don't get a lot of speaking practice. You need to work on all 3 areas. You need to learn around 10,000 words to reach fluency. And the best way to do this is using mnemonic associations, visualizing and linking the word with its meaning. You can learn hundreds of words a day this way. Without this, you rely on input or rote memorization, and that's a complete waste of time, extremely slow. Flashcards are fine, but only if you use associations. Spaced repetition is helpful, but it's much more efficient if you combine it with mnemonic associations. You'll remember most of the words long term much more easily this way. Start with the most common words, the 500 most common words, the 1000 most common words, and so on and so forth. You can memorize this in a weekend with the right method. Mnemonic associations and a lot of reviewing. And once you know these, you can start reading. You'll understand 50 to 80% of what you read with just 1000 words. And context will help you get the rest. And if you keep reading, you learn all the grammar in context and also the rest of the vocabulary. Speaking of grammar, you don't need to study rules or anything like that. You don't need grammar books, you don't need grammar exercises, multiple choice, none of that nonsense. That's all unnatural and you shouldn't do it. If you know the words and you see the words and you read and listen to the language, knowing the words, you learn the grammar in context, right? Just make sure to read and listen a lot. And of course, continue memorizing new vocabulary with mnemonic associations. That will speed up the process immensely. Reading alone does work, but it's much slower. Like I said, you also need to do a lot of listening. This not only gives you extra reviews of the sentences you're trying to learn, you also hear the grammar and you review it, and you learn the pronunciation, both for listening comprehension and also for your own pronunciation when you speak. So a lot of listening is obviously extremely important. But again, you need to memorize vocabulary. If you skip the memorization and you just try to read and listen, you will not understand much in the beginning and you'll have to listen to beginner materials for years, and you don't want to do that. But if you memorize vocabulary, and a lot of it, you'll understand a lot of what you're listening to very early on, which will make listening much easier, much more enjoyable, and you do more of it, and you'll improve way faster. Now let's talk about speaking. The first thing that needs to be said is that you won't speak well just from input. You need speaking practice. You won't speak well just from listening and reading and watching videos. You need a lot of speaking practice. Speaking is a physical skill. The same way no one gets good at public speaking just by listening to public speakers and reading books, and no one gets good at playing music just by listening to music, you can't get good at speaking without doing a lot of speaking practice and deliberate speaking practice. Anyone who says input is all you need, some supposed experts will say that input is enough. They're wrong, and they have no idea what they're talking about. If you only do input, you'll understand the language, but your speech will always be slow and hesitant, just bad. And you will also improve very, very slowly. Also, for the dude bros who say just move to the country, get a girlfriend who speaks the language, etc., that doesn't work either. There's nothing in the air in the country that makes you speak the language by breathing there. And the getting a girlfriend to learn a language strategy is not even worth commenting on. All those things, you learn a few words here and there over the years if you do that, but unless you work on your speaking skills, you will not become fluent by knowing native speakers or living in the country, unless you do real work, obviously. You need to do real work. The most important thing you need to do to learn to speak, to become fluent as soon as possible, is using language islands. Make a list of all the conversations and situations you'll probably face, everything you want to be able to say in those situations. Write it all down, every single sentence, translate it all into the target language, create audio files, create a spreadsheet with 2 columns, with English on one side and the target language on the other, and start reading and listening and repeating aloud those sentences translated over and over and over again. If you learn 1,000 useful sentences, you'll be able to have decent conversations. You can get there in a matter of weeks. But remember that if you don't do enough listening, you won't be able to understand the replies you're getting. So you need to listen a lot as well. But when it comes to fluency, language islands are king. Nothing improves your fluency faster as long as you do it right and you do it actively. You repeat the sentences aloud. They're your own sentences, they're grammatically correct, and if you repeat them aloud enough times, you'll become fluent, you learn to think in the language, and even your pronunciation will improve if you've been doing shadowing with them. Learning with complete sentences is much better than learning simple words because you then learn to speak in complete sentences. Your speaking will flow instead of having to think of the grammar and all of that when you're trying to speak. You need to think fast when you're trying to speak. So take those sentences that you've written and translated and start repeating them aloud over and over again. The more repetitions, the better. You will not sound like a native speaker by doing this, but after doing 100,000 reps with 1,000 sentences or 2,000 sentences, you'll speak pretty fluently. It's like listening to a song you like and singing along with it, except you are repeating aloud your own sentences. You should also translate those sentences into the target language verbally, without looking. Read them in English and try to say them in the target language, and then check. And you will probably make a lot of mistakes when you're doing this, but then you try again and again and again. You do this thousands of times. And with this exercise, you will learn to think in the language faster and faster. And you will also troubleshoot your speaking, because you'll make mistakes and then you get immediate feedback. You try again, you'll probably make much fewer mistakes. You try again and again until you speak virtually error-free. Virtually, because no one speaks error-free, even in your native language. This will build fast reaction time for conversations. This is much more effective long-term than going out and trying to talk to people, because you're working deliberately. If you learn to speak by talking to people, you'll never get past the conversational level. If you work on your language islands and you do retrieval practice with them, and you also talk to people, you become conversational way faster, and also you keep improving much longer and you become fluent way faster. Like I said, translation is key. Translate from English into the target language, from memory, aloud, always aloud, then check, look at the feedback, correct. Repeat. This will fix your mistakes, your spelling, and if you do this in writing, you'll fix your spelling as well. If you do this daily, after a few weeks, you'll make almost no mistakes. You'll speak fluently, accurately, and clearly. And if you also do shadowing and listening, your pronunciation should be pretty good. This whole system works really well for any language. It worked for me in over a dozen languages. I didn't learn English this way. I learned it in school and then online as a teenager. But for every other language I've learned, I used this method. Before that, I wasted years with apps and classes until I figured this out. So you should take my advice, get results faster, and save yourself a lot of time.